At that time, I had moved next to a boarding house, which had a large tamarind tree in the yard. One day, I felt like picking a few, and since everyone was free to take as many tamarinds as they wanted, I made an extraordinary effort and climbed the tree. But after searching and searching, I didn't find any. The kids, those little bastards who spent their days up in the tree, had already picked almost all of them. As I was coming down, I suddenly saw a branch at the top that had many clusters of tamarinds. I quickly climbed up to it and saw there was a red rope tied around the branch. I didn't think anything of it and started picking tamarinds until I got tired. I remember waking up early that morning from some sort of nightmare I can no longer recall. It was unbearably hot, so I got out of bed and lit a candle. I walked slowly toward the kitchen to put the candle on a table, but when I got to the table, I discovered that my tamarinds had simply disappeared. And since I was sure I had put them there unless they had grown legs and walked away, someone must have taken them. I went down to the dark basement to check the windows, and I saw that one of the panes was broken. That led me to believe that someone had entered through there. But something didn't make sense. The window was so small that not even a child could fit through it. How was that possible? I had no idea. But whoever entered through that window must have had a body of inhuman proportions. The next day I went back to the tree to pick more tamarinds because the others had disappeared. When I got home, I started locking the windows tightly to prevent anyone from entering again. As I was closing the window in my room, I saw a small boy staring at me so intently that it bothered me. I asked him what he wanted. The boy said, "Richard hates it when people take his tamarinds." I asked him who Richard was, but the boy had already run off. I remember going outside and chasing the boy until I caught up with him and grabbed his arm. I asked him again who Richard was. The boy replied, "Richard is the owner of the tamarinds you took, and I don't think locking the windows will be enough. He'll find a way in." That night, I woke up due to the discomfort from the heat. I was drenched in sweat and the room and the rest of the house were dark. I remember grabbing a small flashlight I had on the nightstand, getting out of bed, and heading to the bathroom sink to splash water on my face. After that, I walked into the dark hallway. As I was halfway down it, I saw my cat staring intently down the hall. I remember he kept pricking his ears as if he was hearing something that caught his attention, something he could hear but I couldn't. I pointed the flashlight into the darkness of the hallway, but there was nothing there. I forgot about it and walked toward the kitchen table. On it were several glasses and the last cluster of tamarinds I had picked the day before. I grabbed a glass and turned toward the fridge. I opened it, took a glass of water and started drinking, trying to quench my thirst. Suddenly, my cat, who was now at my feet, began meowing louder and louder, rubbing against my legs as if trying to get my attention. But I ignored him and kept drinking. When I finished, I closed the fridge, turned around, and that's when, right next to the table, holding my cluster of tamarinds in his hand, I saw what looked like a boy of about 12 or 13 years old. I remember he was wearing briefs. He was so skinny that even in that darkness I could see the shape of his bones through his skin. His skin, by the way, was so pale that it gave the eerie impression that there was no blood circulating through his body. I remember he was staring at me. He didn't make any movement. He just stood there, looking at me. I assumed that must be Richard, and the fact that he had the audacity to enter my house again and take the tamarinds in front of me, as if I were nobody, made me really angry. I remember at that moment I told him to leave my house, or I would call the police. That made the boy start walking slowly toward the kitchen exit. It gave me chills that made me shiver. Not because of how strange the boy was, but because of how he walked. I don't know how to explain it, but he moved as if he were some kind of puppet controlled by a demonic force. It was dark and I could only see him for a few seconds, but I remember his whole body swayed from side to side with each step. It seemed like he was going to fall, but then he regained strength and stood up again, only to sway again. That made me think that boy was sick. I don't know what kind of illness he had, but it was terrifying. I remember stepping back in shock, and I don't know what I stepped on, but I slipped and fell to the floor, breaking the flashlight and plunging everything into complete darkness. A few minutes later, when I managed to light a match, the boy was gone, along with my tamarinds. The next day at sunset, with the sun setting in front of me, I found myself sitting at the foot of the tamarind tree, chewing on a few tamarinds, wondering whether I should go to the police or talk to Richard's parents first. I didn't know what kind of illness that boy had, but it was worrying. Someone in that condition should be hospitalized. I thought of asking some nearby kids if they knew who Richard was and if they knew his parents. Most of them said yes, and one of them asked why I was asking. I told them that Richard had entered my house and taken my tamarinds. Immediately after saying that, all the kids nearby stared at me with curiosity. One of them came closer and asked if I could hear him. I told them I didn't just hear him. I told him he was right in front of me. That made several kids look surprised, and some even looked scared. I asked why they were so afraid of a sick boy. That's when a young man, chewing on some tamarinds, said, "The problem is that Richard isn't sick. Richard is dead. That boy you saw, if you really saw him, died more than 15 years ago. He died one day when he slipped from the tree and broke his neck. That was after he tied a red rope to a branch, threatening anyone who dared to take a tamarind from it. They say Richard was so selfish that even after death, he doesn't want to share the tamarinds. They say he rolls in his grave every time someone picks a tamarind from his branch, and that he asks the devil for permission to rise and come for his tamarinds. That's what they say." I remember that before the young man finished speaking, I stood up and left because I was about to vomit. Finding out that the boy who entered my house and looked me in the eyes was dead is something so terrifying that even today I refuse to believe it.